So I'm going to give a fairly high level overview of a process that started for us in 2021 and is still really under refinement. Of course, continuous improvement, right? Always refinement. I am going to try to leave time at the end for questions, but please feel free to reach out to me, especially now that we're going to be running a little bit shorter on time. Um, Shoot me an email, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm sure FirstGen Forward can connect you to me, whatever we need to do if you have questions or if you have any follow-up after the presentation. Um, this is something I can talk about all day. So again, I'm going to try and keep this as a high level, but jot your questions down. I'm happy to stay as long as need be for questions and whatnot too. But with that, I am going to walk you through the process that we underwent to assess the effectiveness of our first year seminar or freshman seminar, which you may see or you'll see in the slides as AAA 1001. It's Advancing Academic Achievement. And for some folks, that might be, it's like a college 101 class, right? So if you have an intervention in mind, you can kind of keep that in the back of your head or jot things down as we go through this. And so really this is going to be like a brainstorming session, right? With examples. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing is going to be getting clarity, right? So, and this sounds like the easy part, which is why I think we often skip it. I know what my intervention is, right? Like it's freshman seminar. Okay. Pretty straightforward. And of course, it's based on best practices. So why can't we just jump right into why it's not working the way that we're expecting? But the freshman seminar at ACC is not the same and doesn't necessarily serve the same purpose as a freshman seminar at a four-year institution, especially one that may be residential. So for us, the intervention is not just a freshman seminar, but an extended orientation for degree-seeking students that are new to college. The purpose for us is to connect them to resources, connect them to each other, and to establish at least one staff member, their instructor, that they can then reach out to for questions. Mhm. Okay, so once we've clarified the intervention, then it's information gathering mode, right? So, what I think is important in this phase is to really approach it with curiosity. In the past, I have seen colleges start a program or an intervention, not get the outcomes that they expect, assume it doesn't work or won't work on their institution, and then they just scrap it, right? So this is where I really expanded beyond just the course pass rates and really started digging into the experiences of both the students and the instructors. So I encourage you to not only use a combination of course, quantitative and qualitative methods, but potentially multiples for each. So each one is really going to be a different piece of the puzzle, and the most obvious may not be the one that reveals a path for improvement. So of course, I listed some examples under each, depending on what your particular intervention is. Those may or may not apply. You may need to look at some other options. So for our current state, like I said, this was a process that started in 2021. Um, I kept getting the question of, and this is when I started at my in my position as well. And I kept getting the question of how is it possible that students aren't passing this class? Like this class should be so easy, right? And again, our pass rates, not great in the 70s. And no one had really been, tracking any longitudinal data. So they hadn't been following up with these students and seeing, is the class really having the impact that it's supposed to? Like, is it really serving the purpose that we intended? So even though, yes, we were assessing the course learning outcomes within the class, but did the class as a whole, as an intervention, serve its purpose? So this is basically the information that I had coming in. So then, going into detective mode, right, was gathering information from the people involved. So I started talking to instructors, I talked to academic advisors, I talked to other staff to try and get a sense of what was the perception at the college of the course, and of course, students. And what I heard was that students were not engaged in the class. Um, Students that might be engaged in the beginning, that engagement often fell off towards the end of the semester, that there was a really high attrition rate. Um, the and when those students either stopped attending or they dropped the class, um, all of a sudden there would be like too few students in the course, and so it would feel really awkward when it was like just the instructor and maybe like four other students. From the instructors, there was some of the content. So there was a diversity module that felt really awkward in the context of the course. And many of the instructors didn't feel confident really facilitating that content. Was a new standardized curriculum that had been implemented, and that was fairly rigid. And so it had very set, PowerPoints and activities, and really made the instructors feel like they had lost some of their creativity and their ownership of the course. Students really didn't seem to feel or make the connection between the class and then their program. So, especially at a community college, right? Students are often really looking to get in and get out. They want to make sure that all the things that they're doing is getting them to graduation and has a reason, right? So really, bottom line, right, neither the instructors nor the students wanted to be in the classroom. So as I started looking at areas of improvement, and as many of you know, implementation is never copy and paste. Um, and that's kind of what it had felt like had been done. So first year experience was a new kind of overarching program that the institution had rolled out at that point. It was only a few years old. And so again, this course as a component of it, also only a few years old. So this is really where like the sleuthing continues, and can help guide some of those qualitative information gathering. And so once you've gotten enough feedback to see where these areas of improvement might be, so it might be, again, that it's not that it's the intervention is the problem, but it might be how is that intervention being delivered? How is it being communicated? Who is the targeted audience? And then how is that audience being targeted, right? How are you reaching out to them? Um, so once you've gotten a few areas of like, okay, this might be, kind of where we have some spaces to improve, it's just piloting, right? So then it's test and retest. Some of those pilots might be small and incremental changes, and some of them might require larger changes and bigger overhauls, which I will go through. The combinations, we did both of those things here in just a minute. But the main thing here is to really go back to that initial information gathering phase, whether that was qualitative, whether that was quantitative, the combination of both, and track those changes. See, like, what were the things that led you to make those changes, and is that the part that improved? And of course, I want to highlight that those changes may not be significant right away. So yes, you'll want to be responsive, but also make sure that you give it some time. Um, for instance, again, with this being a class and you not only are looking to make changes in about perceptions, as well as maybe process changes, that especially perception takes a lot more time than maybe changing a process. But we're talking about students and we're talking about staff, right? And the way that somebody, like an instructor, has led their course and now we're making changes to it, that's going to take some time for them to get used to those changes as well. Okay, so the changes that we made based on the feedback that we gathered, and going back to that current state kind of evaluation data, is we slowly raised the course caps from 12 to 20. So this was again in response to instructors and the attrition rate and students not attending and students dropping the class. And then once there's only a few students, then that gets weird and those students stop attending, right? So if you're starting out with a lower, lower cap, then that is felt much more quickly than if you have a higher cap and you only lose, you lose a couple of students in the beginning. We all have attrition. And then that class still feels more full. We did change some of the communication, so really making the course and the benefits like a main point of conversation during the advising and registration component during onboarding. So previously, the way that had been communicated was more as oh, by the way, there's this extra class you have to take. And so it was really it was more about it just being a requirement versus what are the benefits of the class. We also shifted away from a 15-week, so the entire semester and any of our late start parts of term. So primarily now we are running the first 10 weeks. The benefits of those, of course, being so one, it gets us to the point in the semester that students register for the following, for the next semester. So helping them with that process. But then it gets the class off their plate a little bit earlier, right? So when talking with instructors and they were talking about the students that were attending, and then all of a sudden their attendance would drop off at the end. It was really that it was they again, first semester students, right, don't always know how to manage finals and all of those final projects and papers and all of the things. And this was the class that could give, right? This was the class that they, rightfully so, if you do the math, this is the class that's going to have the least impact on their GPA. So if we were able to get this, off their plate before finals hit, they get that grade, they get a passing, hopefully, right, an A. But they get that initial grade and that initial just like, okay, I can do this going into finals. And then really, again, going back to that clarification of what was the intervention and who is the intended audience. Previously, the course had been set as a requirement and had been rolled out as a requirement of all new students. And so really refocusing that it's degree seeking students. So for us, what that means is that students who are in short-term programs, who are doing applied associate degrees as opposed to an Associate of Arts or an Associate of Science. Those which are often cohorted, right? Their classes are very prescriptive, and they are often with the same instructors all the way through. Those students are typically getting very similar outcomes and very similar things that we are trying to equip those other students that are doing a general Associate of Arts or an Associate of Science. And they're getting that through their programs. So again, really trying to refocus and clarify who is this intervention intended for. And then we did a course structure shift to a choose your own adventure model, which that in and of itself is an entire different presentation, and I would love to chat with you about it if you're interested. Um, but again, when we think about our population, right, we have students all over the board, coming from many, many different entry points. And so we need to meet them where they are. And so that in and of itself has made a large shift in students seeing the benefit of the class and being able to connect it to their goals. On the instructor side, really trying to leverage their expertise. And so allowing instructors, creating some specialized section, so some that were for career exploration for maybe undecided students. We ran some affinity-based sections. We've done some pathway-based. This fall, we're planning on running one for students who are interested in careers connected to the space industry. And then really building in some choice and flexibility for the instructors, but then maintaining some standardized assessments, again, so that we can continue to assess the course and those learning outcomes, and that beyond just, again, the effect of the overall course as an intervention. Okay. So again, the really fun part, so to see how these changes really the impact that it made. So as you see, our pass rates by our semester. So we started this process, like I said, in 2021. Um, 20 fall 23 is about when that is when we rolled out the new curriculum and those curricular changes. Previously was when we started making piloting some of the parts of term, the shorter parts of term. And then again, as we saw that 10-week part of term being ideal, again, slowly ramping that up and switching more of our full 15-week sections to the 10-week sections. And so you'll see that first 10 weeks, again, we did try to see previously when we did late start sections, they were often the last 10 weeks. And some of those we were saying they weren't really like true late start students. Realistically, they were just students putting off the class, again, because of how that class was perceived previously. And so really shifting that as well. Um, and again, that first 10 weeks showing a dramatic difference in our pass rates. Not only did the students respond well, but our instructors also responded very well. They far and away prefer the first 10 weeks. It really fits with our curriculum much better. It is a 1 credit class. Sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier. So the 1 credit fits really well in 10 weeks. So one of the things I mentioned before that we didn't really know what was that long-term impact, right? And so this last summer was the first time that we also had the capacity on our institutional research to run some of this longitudinal data. And again, we see a greater impact on some of our specialized populations and populations that we as an institution are focused on right now. So, of course, our first gen students, but also our part-time and adult students. So the darker bar there being the students that did take our Intro to College Life class, versus the lighter bar there being the ones that did not. Okay, I didn't get to leave quite as much time for questions, so I feel like it's going to be a little rapid fire if we want to use the last 2 minutes, but that's okay. Like I said, feel free, please, to reach out to me in whatever way is best for you. Shoot me an email, whatever that is. Be happy to schedule even a virtual chat or something too if you want to talk more in depth about any of these. All right. What did students believe was most useful about the course? Oh, okay. So I cut off my last slide, which is what students are saying now. So I do believe that slides are going to be sent out to you all. Um, so students now will often talk about the way, so we also shifted the way that we connect them to resources. So if you are interested in hearing more about a lot of those curricular shifts, like I said, that in and of itself is like a whole separate presentation. Would love to chat with you about that. But that shifted what students found impactful and what was useful about the class. And it kind of ran the board depending on where students were at, right? Some of our adult students really felt like they were able to kind of, you know, dust off the cobwebs. They felt a little rusty being back in school. And so it was more of a confidence booster. Some of our students, it was just the fact that the way that they got connected to tutoring resources and all of our resources in the library. Other students, it was really about personal development and some of that internal development and resiliency. Um, we talk a lot about expected. Um, it's called the W curve, but some of those like expected, uh, the test that's not going to go as well. There's going to be points in the semester where you're going to feel like you can't do it or like you don't belong here. And that is something you can anticipate. And once they're anticipating those things, then they can work through them differently.